we start with this team that was just 2 wins away from an NBA Finals berth in Trae Young's young career, a team with a young star that cannot lose this past behind him of being traded for Luka Doncic. Like there's so much past in history to a team that should be so young and should have so much hope, but right now is facing like a really big prove it season in Quinn Snyder's first year.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure on this Atlanta Hawks team. There's a lot of pressure on Trae Young for a guy that, in terms of just putting up stats, he's always going to do it. But the question marks are just so big about what he can do as a leader, what he can do as the lead guy on a team, and can he really deliver the consistent playoff success, consistent winning seasons. So the pressure is really on him, and the pressure's on Quinn Snyder coming in. Obviously, a very good coach, but this is a situation that there's a lot of question marks. Is it the right fit? They went and made the big trade to get DeJounte Murray in. Is it a good fit with him and Trae? Can he figure that out? Can they get a bit more defense? Can they finally have some decent spacing on the floor? I mean, their spacing was god awful last year, and they've obviously traded off John Collins, so now they're going to give more opportunities to a couple of guys like Sadiq Bey, like AJ Griffin to try and hopefully get a bit more shooting into the team. Will that make a big difference? But it's gonna be really interesting to watch this Hawks team, because in terms of like just their roster, you're like, this is a team that surely should be at least close to top six in the East for most of the season. If maybe they fall into the play-in, fair enough. But on the whole, as overall roster in terms of star talent and good vets and solid young guys, like they've got the makeup on paper.
Yeah, yeah. When you really put these names together and then you put Quinn Snyder together, I think just starting the conversation off of like hot or cold. Like when you think about a roster constructed on Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, DeAndre Hunter, John John Collins is not there, so we're thinking Sadiq Bey or AJ Griffin. Who's that's one question I have before we even take the temperature here. Is like who's going to be the primary wing on this team? Or do they play them both? We've seen a lot of small ball from Quinn Snyder over the years, and I think Sadiq can play. He's strong enough to play the four. Defensively, I think that's his best position. So maybe we do kind of project that it would be AJ Griffin at the three and Sadiq Bey at the four. Clint Capella, whether or not he's going to be traded, and that's a big question I have. That's the biggest question I think for the Hawks is if these trade rumors for Pascal Siakam come up. But just thinking about those five and looking at the over under, which is 42.5. I don't think they have too much of a bench. I mean, you have to factor in Bogdan, you factor in some of the energy you get from Okongwu, and then outside of that, the depth on this team isn't super high. I am really intrigued about Jalen Johnson, even though he's had an inefficient year last season. Still a young player, still very raw. He's got a lot of tools that if he were to put things together under the right training, could make an impact. But given kind of, I think their big problem is a lack of depth and that starting five. How do you feel about that over under?
Yeah, it's tough. I'd be tempted to take the over on it, considering they won 41 games last year, and now they're going to have a full season of Quinn Snyder, and you hope that Young and Murray can find a way to kind of fit that bit better. Because like on paper, when you looked at it, you were like, okay, we got this elite scoring guard who can't really play defense. We're going to pair him with a guard who can play very good defense, but unfortunately, neither of them are really great playing off the ball, and they both always want the ball in their hands. So there's trouble comes from that. And obviously, like I mentioned, the spacing is going to be was a big issue for them last year, and getting rid of John Collins was important for that. Sadiq Bey shot 40% from deep for them last year. AJ Griffin was shooting 39%. I believe that AJ Griffin could take a jump if he gets more minutes. Still, obviously, a raw talent, but you think that little bit of differential, they can get a bit more shooting within this team, and hopefully they can find a bit of a better balance between Murray and Young. Then you look at and you're thinking, yeah, they could go and win 45, 46 games next year.
Yeah. So I mean, stylistically, like you mentioned the off-ball shooting. I think we talked about it last year when the trade happened, like how theoretically it worked, and it's always easy to blame coaching, right? It's always easy to see the outcome is not what you imagine it could be and say, well, Nate McMillan was not a creative coach. I mean, it seems like that is, the general consensus, and that seems like that is to blame for stagnation. But also you can think about the natural habits of a player. Is Trae Young naturally a catch and shoot player? His percentage on low volume would suggest so, always being a plus 40% catch and shoot player, but not having the habits to relocate, not having the habits to necessarily look for those off-ball opportunities. But again, Quinn Snyder, whole summer under that, and with the buy-in that we seem to see, maybe that's a change that we see. And I was talking about questions for this team. I think it's how do players evolve under a Quinn Snyder system, and I think you have to come back to that question again and think about if Trae Young can be a movement shooter, can really adapt to being a guy without the ball and shooting off the ball. Because I think that's, I don't know if you agree with me, but I think that between Trae Young's ability as a lob passer in the pick and roll, as his ability as a point guard in general, like having the IQ to really make the extra pass and really make the right read, his deep ball is a unique threat. While it's not efficient, like that's something that this team should focus on getting back to. And how do you do that? And I don't think the answer is letting him just rip it from 33 feet, 5 seconds into the shot clock off the dribble. Like, find more actions for him to get wide open, for him to have a second to dip, to shoot, and not be being chased by the best defender in the other team. So we'll see how things look in preseason too. I think that's what we'll right away see, like the new sets that they've been working on. Because Quinn Snyder's program has been notoriously hard to adjust to. Talked about that with the Jazz, I think, last year, about how Donovan Mitchell definitely had to adjust into that. Mike Conley had to adjust into that, and players have said how difficult it is to adjust to. So are you expecting that change to happen? And if it doesn't happen, in this one summer, is that kind of prognostic for this is ultimately not the team? He's not the player for this team for Quinn Snyder in the future if he does not evolve into that type of player, given his deficiencies.
Yeah, I would start to think that it's kind of like, it's on one hand you're like, where could they really go if Trae Young is not their guy? Are they kind of just stuck with it and they just kind of have to find some way of making Trae Young play, making this team all around Trae Young and letting him just kind of do his own thing? But the best guys know they have to make adjustments. And if Trae Young wants to be at the top level, he wants to be a guy who's going to be all NBA and all star, even in the conversation for MVP awards, he's got to make adjustments. He's got to change his game. He's got to build on those weaknesses. We all know the strengths that he has, but you kind of focus the last kind of year or two, the main focus has been on his deficiencies and his weaknesses. So he should be looking at that and thinking, I got to improve here. This is a really big experience for him. Is he going to be a guy in the NBA, or is he just going to be another star who had the talent but didn't fulfill on it? That's what this
Yep.
year is going to be about. And I think Quinn Snyder is a guy who should demand the respect and to be able to get a guy like Trae Young to really buy in and commit, because he's not a guy you're bringing in and thinking, all right, it doesn't work after 6 months, we're going to ditch him. That's not going to happen with Quinn Snyder. They gave him a nice big contract. They're committed to him for the long haul, and Trae Young has to do the same.
Yep. And I think I completely agree with that. Like he needs to buy into that. And I think he is. I mean, you look at his not to say this is how it'll play out, because it players can always have buy-in during the offseason. It's during the regular season when is there that chemistry where they can actually rely on each other. But it seems like he is excited to be learning something new, to be trying something different. It seems to be that that's the focus, is different. It's not, I think there's a certain tone you get from players when there's a new coach, and it's like about them. It's about how they're going to get theirs, and they're going to finally be able to play the way they want to play. I think you see that from guys like Kyrie. But I think he seems to be saying the right things. But yeah, I think if we're looking at Trae Young, and he's, again, I mean, like, if you look at it last season, 33% from three shot. He had his best season though the year before that, 38%. Before that, 34, and maybe we'll just scratch that 32% freshman year season. But if he is 48th again, anywhere between that 48 to 50 and 3 point attempt rate, that's just not tenable, I think. And I think a lot of people are burning him for having those comments about needing to shoot more threes at the end of the season because everyone's like, well, you sucked at shooting three. Well, yeah, but maybe it's the kind of shots he's getting because he his level of difficulty on these threes is I think what's been killing not just his percentage but the team. Um, he can't be that small of a player. He can't be that limited as a player and not fully invest his offensive talents onto that end of the floor. He can't be taking less shots than, I mean, like if you even look at so you can't be taking less shots from three than Julius Randle. Can't be taking less shots from three than Anthony Edwards, than like even Tyler Hero. Like he's got to be like you pull that list out. He's got to be a top 10 3 point shooter minimum. And if he's not by halfway through the season, I think that just might be, some players just have flashy talents that are not going to translate to an efficiency level. And that's my biggest question. Is his shooting actually going to show improvement? And if it doesn't, I don't think that his level of player is going. I think that they're smart enough to know that that's not a long term recipe for success with Quinn Snyder. Quinn Snyder's there to win a championship. And if Trae Young is not going to be an elite 3 point shooter, that's just not going to happen.